Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to our StreamCast today, which is the first and only time so far
Yep.
we have tried to talk about our topic for today.
Yep. And if you happen to notice that today is episode 50 and last week we had episode 51, ignore that. This is episode 50 because it's very appropriate that we make our episode 50 instead of doing in the obligatory Cavan Scott reference, we can just do a whole stream about something written by Cavan Scott.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It's the first time that we've tried to do that
It's the
with
first
this.
time.
And sometimes things in life just happen in different numerical orders than you
I
would
mean,
expect.
this is just like the prequel trilogy, It's just sometimes you go back.
I mean, it's a
That's
little known fact, but William Henry Harrison was our 72nd president, and it's just how it happens. We can't really explain why, but we'll catch up eventually.
okay.
Trust me, I have a PhD in political science.
You are now. You should have changed your name to say Doctor Professor Django.
Oh yeah.
You're so worried about it. Oh man.
I have a terminal degree in these things. I know.
Welcome everyone.
But I did also, for whatever it's worth, consider going on a tangent about the Women's World Cup. Like I
But
did for the men's last year. But instead, we'll just jump right into our long awaited and not yet attempted topic.
right, first try, first try.
Yep, got it in one. Got it in one.
Yep.
Old one take PortHaven, what they
Yep.
call us. But we want to talk today about Dooku Jedi Lost, the Cavan Scott
Yes.
audio drama.
Yes.
Which we are both big fans of. Maybe not quite as much as our Falcin in the chat.
Yep.
Um,
I had to hand over my super fan card to her. With the number of times she's listened, that's only right, but still.
but given that we've not talked about this at all yet,
Yep.
ever,
Not even a little bit.
why don't we
There
have?
was a spoiler-free review. We
Yes.
did do a spoiler-free. That was the first time,
Yeah.
and no, the other time we talked about it.
If that's not linked in the description now, it probably will be by the time the VOD goes up. So,
Yep.
So you can check that out if you haven't seen it yet. Which this is going to be very spoilery.
Yep.
By the way, Lobot will remind you about that later. But yeah, Nolan Dooku's lightsabers are my favorite too. I mean, not that I, one, can go to Galaxy's Edge, or two, have $150, but
Right.
but I'm a little bummed out that Dooku's sabers aren't for sale because I think they're the best one.
It's fair. Ahsoka's are.
Yeah, no, I like Ahsoka's too, but I still like Dooku's. But I could go on for a while about lightsaber design, but
Yeah, right. Next week on the PortHaven StreamCast. But no, we have so much to talk about.
But why don't we start out talking about thoughts on audio drama as a format before we get into some of the story stuff? Because this was I used to listen to this, dates myself, I guess, as like an early 90s kid, even, because I used to listen to like radio dramas like on the way home from school, and once I got home from school, like those good old late 80s early 90s focus on the family kind of radio dramas that were on the actual radio, that like before podcasts, when they were like you had to dial in to a number and things for not iHeartRadio, whatever newfangled things the kids are listening to today, but like
wherever Ryan Seacrest is now.
Yeah. He's just in New York. He's just waiting there 365 days. He just stands out there waiting for a ball to drop. He's there in Times Square all the time.
Freddie.
But you never know. Things happen out of order sometimes.
You
might just have New Year's in July sometimes.
It's just why not?
But apart from that, I'd never really had any experience with this. I'd listened to some audio books, but this was a very different type of thing, having a full cast, and a lot of the Foley and sound work that went into it. And I don't think it had a separate soundtrack, but I thought it really utilized extant Star Wars music really well. So what did you think about the audio drama as an old but revived Star Wars media format?
I overall I'm really excited they did it. Star Wars Legends has a rich history of audio dramas with
Right,
Dark Forces and Tales from the Jedi all got radio drama adaptations. So to see this come back was really awesome, especially
right,
with a story that we didn't even have in Legends that I think we've all been kind of waiting for a while
right,
to get with Dooku. Personally, I was a little bit worried about the audio format just because I'm not a very audio centric person. I'm much better at visual or better with processing visuals. So I like when I listened to it, I went into like Jedi trance. Like I turned all the lights off in my room and like put a hood over my head, and I just made myself listen because I'm a millennial with a short attention span. But it was completely worth it because it was wonderful. And I think it's something where if I just listened to more audio things, that my brain would learn to process audio better. That's largely the issue there. But I thought they utilized the format really well, right? Like it felt like something that was made for that medium as
right.
opposed to an adaptation of a book into an audio book. Just the way like Kai Narek's character would float from ear to ear. Like it was a very good experience with headphones as opposed to just listening to it in the open air. They put so much work into the sound and that sort of thing where it really felt like it was written for the medium that it was in.
Right.
And I think that's something that's very strong for that.
Right. And I think we have a comment in the chat about
Mm-hmm.
how great that the Dooku character was, the voice actor, and I
Yeah.
really agree. It was different than Christopher Lee, but I think it became
Yes.
a distinctive voice all on its own.
Mm-hmm.
And the one issue I had with that is that, to start with, to my American ears, all British voices sounded incredibly
Similar.
similar. But you they became distinctive over time.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of value there. Not that there isn't value in audiobooks, but I think there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
value to having different voice actors, be able to flesh out those characters
Yeah,
in different
definitely.
ways. And especially with one of the Star Wars characters that's really near and dear to my heart is Asajj Ventress, who we'll talk about more. But Asajj's voice was spot on,
Yes.
from how that is represented in the
Mm-hmm.
Clone Wars and other things. To me, Ventress has a distinctive voice almost to the same extent as like Hondo,
Right.
and so like the voice is part of the character in a
Mm-hmm.
way, and that was really well captured. Um, and I know something you care a lot. You told me this when we first started listening to it.
Mm-hmm.
That you were worried about what Yoda's voice was going to be like.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and it's funny too because Yoda. I really like Yoda in this, both in his voice, both in terms of literally his voice and in terms of like Yoda syntax. I get really worried because Yoda's one of those characters where it's really easy to like overdo it and make a Yoda caricature
right,
instead of like Yoda. I was trying to listen to an audiobook after this, a Legends audiobook, and it had Yoda in it, and I stopped because the narrator was doing his darndest, but he did the Yoda voice. I couldn't, and so I was worried about it because Yoda is my homeboy, and it like I mean it was really a bold move to name this Dooku Jedi Lost when it was entirely about Yoda. I know there were scenes that didn't have Yoda in it, but all the scenes really served really well to build up Yoda's character, and I really appreciated that. And because I don't know if you know this, but all Star Wars stories are actually really about Yoda, and if you miss that, you might not understand them fully. But no, I was as a Yoda fan, I was very satisfied by the story.
right. But I think I really hope, and I can't imagine that given how I think popular Jedi Lost was, I can't imagine that
Yeah,
we won't get more of these. And
I yeah, I hope so.
I certainly hope that we do. But it's interesting though too, because they announced the release of Jedi Lost like a month ahead of
Yeah,
time. So that's one thing that every time I see that Del Rey is posting something, I'm like, the possibility that we could have another audio drama a month
Right there.
from every time they tweet,
Yeah.
kind of blows my mind a little bit.
My personal plug, I'm hoping if they do another audio drama, I want one either from Chirrut or season 3 or later Kanan, and
Right.
do an audio drama from the perspective of somebody who can't see. And I think that would be really an interesting way to use the medium. But anyway,
it really would.
That's my side note.
And we both want the follow up to Dooku
Yes!
Jedi Lost.
Dooku Sith found.
Yeah.
You can use the title. We won't fight you for it.
Yeah. Although, is it one of those things now that because we have suggested it, they specifically can't do it?
Dang it! That was our title. We have to scrap it.
We should do a whole streamcast where we just at every author ever and make suggestions of things we know we don't want. That's a way of forcing their hand.
They can never do the things we don't want. Anyway, now we're really getting off topic, but I have actually tweeted to Cavan and told him I'm waiting for Dooku Sith found. So, but he, as usual, was as coy as ever about not committing to anything. So he's good at many things, including not to committing it to anything on Twitter.
Like when he told us that he wanted to write Princess Leia while he was writing Princess Leia.
I will never forget that. I will never. Or when I was interviewing him last and he was like, yeah, I talk to Claudia Gray sometimes. And then like the next day they announced Project Luminous. And I was like, but yeah, anyway.
But if we transition to the story a little bit, I want to start off talking about kind of Dooku in this story is something that I feel like I've wanted for a long time.
Yes.
Because Dooku is, it's hard to say he's one of my favorite characters, because especially out of the prequel trilogy, because there's so many of my favorite characters. You know, Jango, or prequel trilogy Obi-Wan is another one of my favorite Star Wars characters, and you got characters like Dex and Joe Costanu who all round out my favorite characters. But to me, Dooku kind of represents the essence of the prequel trilogy in a lot of ways, because we have this intermix between politics and, you know, these different Force religions of the Jedi and the Sith. Right. And I've always been really curious as to what kind of role Dooku plays in that, because we always understand that Palpatine is the mastermind of everything that happens in the prequel trilogy. And so I've really been interested to what extent Dooku, to say just cared about things kind of makes too much light of it. But I've been curious to what extent Dooku cared. Like, did he care about politics? Did he care about, you know, Jedi doctrine and things like that? Or was he just another tool? And for me, this was a really great story. We didn't get to see the one moment apart from what we saw that I would have wanted, which is Dooku's actual fall to the dark side. But I got everything else that I wanted out of this as a Dooku story. So what did you think about this as a Dooku story primarily? Even though you've already stipulated it's a Yoda story.
Well, I was about to say, since this is a story about Yoda, one thing I found really interesting was Dooku had this. Look, you laugh, but it's true. Okay, Master and Apprentice was another great novel that was entirely about Yoda. But anyway, Dooku had such an interest in politics, and we even see him addressing the Senate on the behalf of different worlds, trying to solve the problems that were in the galaxy at large. And what was interesting to me is Dooku is doing all of this stuff and has all these interests, and Yoda is doing these things as well. Like, there's when he learns Beast Mastery from light side Kreia, Lean. She's always kind of like Kreia in my head, but I know that's wrong. He was told it's because, one, she's better at teaching it, but two, because Yoda was busy working out a trade deal or something. And I was always kind of like, well, if Yoda is tied into all of these different political things, in fact, this is one of the critiques of Yoda, and rightfully so, in a lot of the prequel era stuff, that he was too involved with these government day-to-day things. Why is Dooku not there? Why is he not interested in what Yoda's doing? Is Yoda not taking him? Is Yoda not allowing him to take part? Or is what Yoda's doing not the actual type of politics that Dooku was interested in? And that was one thing I kind of wondered. But overall, I really liked the journey, because it's so hard to really write a character who starts out light, that you like on the light side, and watch them fall to the dark, especially when you know they're not coming back, because we know how Dooku ends. And to watch that and to feel sympathy for the journey he's going on, even though you know what he's doing is ultimately the wrong thing. And I thought it did that really well. I thought the sibling connection was a really good way to do it, because I mean, I hate to say this because it's what the prequel trilogy did, but like the I fell to the dark side because I fell in love thing has been done a lot in Legends, maybe not as much in current canon because there hasn't been as much time in current canon, but I've seen that story. But to see a familial story, I thought was really good, and it got into, why were the Jedi so afraid of someone knowing their family? So
Right.
apparently not afraid enough to not allow them to go visit their home world as an 8-year-old or however old he was in that part.
Well, and it's funny to me too, because one of my questions about Dooku was always, did his politics precede his Sith status? Like, did he fall to the dark side before he kind of started moving away from the Republic? And I feel like we got an answer to that, but I really like, the way you put it, that we see Dooku's fall in a way that doesn't really have anything to do with like Sith temptation. Like,
Right.
it's not like, with Anakin, where Palpatine is always over his shoulder and always prodding him. And it may very well be the case that other media will come out and we'll see that Palpatine orchestrated everything in this audio drama too. But at least from the perspective we see right now, that's not what happened. Like, this was a story that developed because Dooku was who he was, because Yoda was who he was, because politics were like they were, because the Jedi dogma was what it was. Like, and it happens independently of Palpatine's machinations. And I really like that it's a Dooku story, even though it's a Yoda story. That it's,
I mean, yes. Yep.
It's a Dooku
Yoda,
story.
Dooku, Jedi Lost. Yeah.
It's a well, it's always funny too, because it's hard for me to separate this in my mind from the Legends novel, Yoda Dark Rendezvous, which is a Yoda story, which is a Dooku story. But
one of my favorites.
But it's a Dooku story that lets Dooku exist on his own terms.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily couch it in who he becomes as much as it tells us how he gets, like, to a place where he can be what we know him later to be. Because by the first time we meet him in the films, he is already Sith, Darth Tyrannus, and we don't know him at all before that. We get what, Mace Windu tells Padme, oh, Dooku was a Jedi. He could never be behind.
Fine.
Right.
Yeah.
But, like, we know nothing about him, and we get this story in a way that makes him sympathetic, like you said, even though we know where he's going to end up. And it starts right from the beginning. So what did you think about allowing, like, we know what the Jedi have in terms of like their policies on family connections.
Family. Yep.
So for the Grand Master of the Order to take a Padawan to a place where he knows his dad rules the planet, like,
I love the Jedi. The prequel era Jedi. They're like my people. They're like my family. And like most families, they're kind of dumb sometimes. And I love them, but I don't know. I don't know what they were thinking. Maybe it was like, if we never let Dooku go to Sereno, he'll figure out that's where he's from. I don't know what the logic it was. Maybe it was like supposed to be a double blind. I would like to think that it was because in some way Dooku was supposed to go to Sereno and they were just open to the Force, but that's not. They're just not the brightest sometimes. But sometimes I feel like they also, maybe not the case here, but I feel like the Jedi kind of have this way of, like, how do I put this? It's almost like they want you to overcome your problems on your own, right? Like, you can't convince me that certain members of the Jedi Order didn't know that Anakin and Padme were at least in some way involved, and yet no one just like put the kibosh on it right from the get go. But that would be tangenting further. But yeah, that was. I almost wonder if it wasn't just a, maybe Yoda just wanted to see what would happen. Especially if you have this idea of when did Yoda? Because again, I'm going to talk about Yoda. When did Yoda want to pick Dooku as his Padawan? Like, when did that come up? And I know you had a theory on why Yoda had picked Dooku. If you wanted,
Oh, sure.
otherwise I could tell
Sure.
people your theory.
No. Well, I think it's kind of twofold. I think the first part of it is, I think Yoda probably recognized that Dooku needed a strong master because he was going to be a strong Jedi. I think Yoda could recognize from early on that Dooku was different, both in his mindset and in his Force abilities. And I think Yoda knew that he could offer him something in that regard that other people could not. Even the master that he knew Dooku specifically wanted. Like Yoda kind of engineered that so that he would get Dooku. I mean, if you're the Grand Master, you get first choice on whoever you want, I'm sure. But even if you're ignoring protocol to take a Padawan as somebody that's on the council, which is something we talked about when we did Master and Apprentice.
Yeah.
But I think more specifically than that, I think Yoda was grooming Dooku to take his place. I think Yoda was prepared. I mean, Yoda, nobody knows, even with foresight, when you're going to die. But I think Yoda knew he was almost 900 years old. I think Yoda knew that eventually he was not going. Like, there was going to have to be another Grand Master of the Jedi, and I think he was grooming Dooku to be that person. I think he wanted to do it personally. That's part of the reason why. I mean, a lot of that supposition, and we don't really get that, expositorily in the audio drama, but that was the impression I got from it.
And what I was going to say, to that point, that's kind of what makes me wonder if if Yoda almost wasn't upset that Dooku kind of went through this with his family. Because at some level, if you are assuming that Dooku is either going to be a highly influential Jedi or maybe take over for you, he's not going to not encounter the Count of Sereno.
Right.
With the way things are going to go. So this is going to happen at any point. And if it happens at a young age, it can be Dooku going through a trial early on to start testing him and to see what would happen. And I think that's part of why Yoda was so betrayed, the Jedi in general so betrayed when they found out that Dooku had kept speaking with Jenza. And I mean, beyond the obvious reasons, I think, maybe if it was a test that they thought Dooku had passed and then found out he had failed, that would be added salt to the wound in a way.
I mean, and Dom makes a fair point too in the chat when he says, if the whole, Youngling clan is going, you can't
not send
Dooku. That sends as much of a signal that allowing him to go. You would think maybe though that if that's a potential situation that they might be given or just supervise them a little bit more. Assign them each a chaperone and let's make sure these children don't end up running through streets and causing earthquakes.
And yeah, right. That's a whole interesting thing with the Lake Titicaca monster. That is not what it's called, but I
might as well be.
Terracotta, that's clay. I'm really bad at names.
The dragon lizard thing.
The dragon lizard, the prophetic dragon lizard.
Yeah.
That looks like in my mind he looks like the dragon from How to Train Your Dragon.
In my mind he looks like a New Year's, like a Chinese New Year's parade kind of dragon.
Yours is probably more accurate because mine isn't scary. Terataka, yes! Thank you, Fabio.
There you go. Sure.
I'm a professional.
That word.
Yeah, so, but that whole thing was very interesting where, Dooku wakes him up at the beginning, and you can almost wonder if that was real at the beginning with the earthquake. And then at the end, Dooku is riding this dragon thing as this kind of almost Dark Knight, not to be confused with your favorite Dark Knight. And it represents a lot because this beast was abused by Serenian's past, and then Dooku bonds with it with this idea that he's I'm seeing your image on a delay, so it took me a second to see the Batman. And then Dooku almost like has this promise that he's not going to abuse it, and then he ends up doing so.
Well, and it's interesting to me too because I wonder the extent to which, like, if Dooku actually awoke the Arataka at
Sorry,
the beginning of at the beginning of the audio drama, like, did the presence of the Terataka alter events on Sereno in the meantime? Like all the stuff that happens, because Dooku has a connection with it, but it's implied that it's larger than just Dooku's beast mastery, that there's some other connection there.
Yeah.
And that maybe somehow the fact that it has at least been partially awakened explains some of the choices that Dooku's dad and brother made across the story too. But that's the genesis for the connection to the Genza also.
Yeah.
And that was that even before they realized they were brother and sister then too, wasn't it?
Yeah, they don't.
It wasn't
they don't know until the end. Yep.
Yeah, it wasn't until the Count came in and where.
Yeah. And really, the Count at the then Count really didn't play that cool at all because he could have also just not acknowledged that he knew Dooku at all, and then there would have been no problems. But he was that angry about it.
Or if like the Jedi didn't keep your birth name. Like you don't have to be, Darth so and so, but like instead of Dooku, you get to be, him.
But I said the Jedi are nice little hot mess family, and I love them dearly, so much. I mean, arguably though, you don't typically have children of the Count of a planet. Like, even if there's millions of planets, statistically compared to the rest of the galactic population, there's not always a need.
Well, and it's interesting too, and this is maybe a tangent too, but it's from the audio drama down this road. Because I think it's interesting that Dooku's dad essentially dropped him off and said, "We don't want him around," which is different than the typical narrative about Jedi Seekers going out finding children to bring them in.
That's or where we get creating children to bring them in.
Oh yeah, well that too. But that's where we get the whole knowledge or not knowledge, but the whole assumption or argument that the Jedi steal children. Comes from that they go out looking for them, and whereas the Count of Sereno might have been given an exemption if he had been cool with having a Force sensitive kid, Dooku might have been able to grow up on the planet altogether. But instead, he doesn't like that, and he sends him away. A kind of point of dramatic irony there.
There's so much with Dooku's family that I still want to know, and this isn't a complaint at all because you can only tell so much story in the audio drama. The audio drama is ultimately about Dooku and Ventress. We haven't addressed much yet, but we will. So like I get it, and there's room for these stories to be told later. But there's so much I want to know, like why did the Count hate a Force-sensitive child so much? Why did Dooku, I mean, apart from their personalities and one being likable and the other one being a jerk, why did Dooku bond so much with Genza and not with his brother? And like to the point where they had this instant connection, not a bond just because they knew they were siblings. and I'm torn because on the one hand, I would say, you could go down the classic Star Wars route, and maybe Dooku and Jinza were twins, but I feel like their age was implied somewhere that they were different. But then I also wondered with maybe he didn't like Dooku. It wasn't about the Force powers, but it was maybe Dooku is not fully a Dooku. Like that could be an issue as well. I would love to know that family's history and where all of that came from, but maybe one day.
That's interesting. Another thing I really liked. This is another parallel to that Dark Rendezvous novel too. I really liked seeing the Jedi, like the not Jedi trials, but like the Padawan.
Yes.
Like, I don't even know what you'd call it, apart from like trials, but like
there are Padawan trials and then like Jedi Knight trials in Legends at least.
But I liked seeing that too because we got a very similar moment to that in Dark Rendezvous novel. Even though Cavan says he hadn't read it, I liked the connection there, and I really liked that moment too, where Dooku is pitted against, his clanmates and like that. Were there other things that you feel like? I mean, I know we're going to want to talk about the Bogan collection and as a separate thing, but were there other sort of aspects of like just what the process of being a Padawan or a youngling is? Because a lot of that I know it existed in other media, but like this was my first experience with like the process of how you move through things. So I'm curious if there are things about that either brought something back from Legends that you liked, or other sort of aspects just that process that you liked.
Well, like I said, one of my favorite aspects of Star Wars ever since I was a kid was Jedi training. I feel like normal Star Wars kids really wanted to be like bounty hunters or like Han Solo, and I was like, I want to join a monastic order that has I don't know what that says about me as a person, but that was where I was like, yes, but whatever. But yeah, that's a whole aspect that I was enthralled by. Just the friendships they had, the rivalries they had, and Jedi kids are still like school children, even though they don't have that to compare anything to. Kids inevitably go to what children go to when they're left to their own devices. So seeing that was so interesting, and then seeing Dooku like learn beast mastery from Lean versus studying under Yoda all the time, and seeing that sort of thing was interesting. But I also liked both with the process with Dooku and then the process with Qui-Gon. It was exactly what you were talking about. I'd seen in a couple different Legends media of just like these Jedi children would grow up and they would think, oh, who's going to pick me? And to some extent, we saw it with Caleb Doom in his comic. This idea of you grow up and you're like, what Jedi is going to pick me to be their Padawan? And that was an element I really liked. It's almost like you're getting picked by your favorite superhero. Right. And whatnot. To talk about Jedi training, and to talk about something I haven't talked about a lot in this discussion, there's a part with Yoda that I really liked.
And I'll say this too, when I was like a day ahead of you in listening to it. And I remember texting you. I was like, there's a part of this that like this is the part you're gonna like, and you'll know it when you get there. But like as soon as I listen to this, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be Jess's favorite.
Yep. So when Yoda first picks Dooku to be his Padawan, and like the next day Yoda's just like chilling in the gardens, and Dooku's like, yo, let's train, I'm ready. And Yoda's just sitting there meditating, and Dooku's like, all right. And he's like every day coming back and he's just like ready. And then he starts like, I'm going to start training in front of him, and I'm going to do weird jumping jack yoga in front of him. And then eventually he's like, I know how to get his attention. I'm going to force lift this is his favorite tree. This is his favorite thing in the whole galaxy. So I'm going to lift it up and basically kill it to show him like how awesome I am. I'm sitting there the whole time like, bro, he just wants you to sit next to him. Like straight up, all he does is want you to sit next to him. And there's always this thing when I read where I'm like, don't get your expectations up. Don't expect them to interpret the character the same way. Like I'm just sitting there. And then finally Dooku just sits next to him and Yoda's like, okay, we'll start. And I was like, yes! This is exactly what I want. Like, I don't know, of all the scenes, it was like that scene and the Moss scene that got the biggest emotional reaction out of me.
So
Don't know what that says about me.
I really like that too because I was imagining like a film montage of like 10-year-old Dooku just like poking Yoda with a stick or something while he's meditating. But yeah, I didn't understand that instinct either. Let me just uproot this tree as a
right.
That's what Yoda wants me to do is start breaking stuff.
Yes. This will show you. Although it was a strangely very Dooku thing to do in a weird sort of way of like, but I feel like maybe not even just to throw that on Dooku. I feel like Anakin would have done that. I feel
sure.
Like it's like that instinctual, I'm a teenage Jedi, let me show you like how Jedi I am at Jediing things. Like that's what they would do. And Yoda's just like, I feel like internally Yoda's like, I've done this so many times. They do this every time. This is how it goes every time. I'm just gonna sit here. He says, he's got. You can't tell he has AirPods in, and he's.
Yeah. It's almost like that moment. I see this from a different perspective since I am a teacher. But like when the class is being loud, and eventually you just realize that the teacher's been staring at you silently, waiting for you to shut up for a few minutes. Like that was that moment. But I like it too because I think it illustrates something that we saw, in this. We saw it with Yoda and Dooku. We see it with Dooku and Rael. We see it with Dooku and Qui-Gon. And then in Master and Apprentice, we see it with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. This whole, like, we intentionally, maybe overstating it, but I think it fits. We intentionally, find Master and Apprentice pairings that don't seem like natural because there's something to be learned in the tension. There's something to be learned by people having sort of different approaches to the Force or different approaches to like their personality or like how they approach Senate or other people, whatever that might be. And I think that we get a lot of that in that moment and across the audio drama too.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that's interesting too because I guess we're talking about the Jedi so much. A big thing that comes up in this novel, and I've seen a lot of discourse online as a result of Jedi Lost and Master and Apprentice, of just how widely different people interpret the Jedi Order in this time period. Like I've seen people who are like, the Jedi Order and the Council is trash, and like they were so arrogant and so self-centered, and they just had no redeeming factors, and they just they screwed up everyone they ever taught. And then you have my view, which is that they're genuinely, as individuals, they're good people that just kind of have a rotten organization, but it's a rot that came from complacency more than anything else. And what's interesting to me about Jedi Lost is, regardless of anyone's feelings on the matter, I feel like you can kind of go into Jedi Lost and it doesn't come down really with an answer. Like Jedi Lost does not declare the Jedi as these kind of corrupt beings, but it also does not declare them innocent. And that there's room, and that's what, when I say I love the Jedi Order, I don't think that they had it perfect by any means, but they're so interesting to me because they are massively more complex than they get credit for, especially in the prequel trilogy.
That's one thing I really enjoyed too about the scene, when they see the busts of all the fallen Jedi, and what do they call them? I lost one.
Yeah, the Lost, and there's a number. It's like the Lost 20, I think.
Because I mean, one, it's foreshadowing for Dooku specifically, and it works as. But I like the way that Yoda says, we have to remember these people because this is where they belonged. Like this is where they were supposed to be, and they aren't here. Not just they all made choices that led the way, but they aren't here because we weren't what they needed. Like we lost them. Like it wasn't that they lost themselves.
Yep.
We lost them. Like we let them leave Like we and I think that's an important, because one, like you say, it acknowledges that the Jedi aren't perfect. But it puts, blame is too strong a word, but it puts kind of the weight of that on the Order by saying this went badly. This was a failure on our part, and something we have to remember, because if we don't remember it, then we can't learn from it, and we can't see, Jedi so and so left, and they talk about it. There are these rumors, some of them fell to the dark side here and there. Others of them just left because, reasons.
Right.
And I think I really liked that emphasis there. Again, not just as a sort of narrative device, because it's predicting, that Dooku's going to have a bust there one day, that we're going to see in the background of Attack of the Clones, but that it also, shows us this real connection.
Yeah, what I like about that is it's almost this kind of beautiful moment, and beautiful in the perspective of it both shows the compassion and the goodness of the Jedi while also showing the problem within. So when I see that and I see Yoda going, we have to remember them because we failed them. Like somehow we as Jedi did not provide them the life they needed by being Jedi. It shows exactly what you said, that they acknowledge that there is some sort of responsibility on their part for how these Jedi were let down. But I think there is this kind of hidden arrogance that comes from good intentions, which I think is ultimately the tragedy of the Jedi in the prequel trilogy, which is perhaps the fallacy is thinking that the Jedi path was ever right for them to begin with, right? So that maybe they couldn't stay with the path of the Jedi because they were just never destined. Like even the Force, maybe called them to be a Jedi in the beginning part of their life, but not for their whole life. And then to see someone leaving the Order as intrinsically bad, or as intrinsically as a failure. But it's not from a place of we Jedi are high and mighty and we let someone down by not making them high and mighty. But it is still kind of this Jedi-centric view. And that's something that I like so much about that moment, is in that one scene, it encapsulates that complexity, that there is this compassion, that the Jedi do care, and that the Jedi are not just these people with sticks up their butts, like the people from the town and Footloose. But they are also very flawed in such a way that they can't even see it themselves.
Well, and it speaks to another one of the things that I think we see about the Jedi Order that's even, tragic in a lot of ways. The fact that, apparently everyone in the Jedi Order ignores the Jedi Code whenever they need to or want to.
Right, yeah.
And one, it's kind of understood that, whether it's, a Jedi Master going off to study Sith stuff, even though that's, or like the Jedi Council knowing that somebody had a kid and making an allowance for it, or whether it's Master and Apprentice, where they kind of send Rael off to do Rael things on his own for a decade.
All sorts of Rael things, and not always on his own.
But well.
Anyway,
but
it's kid-friendly stream.
But
not really.
It both shows what I think is flawed and what is beautiful about the Jedi Order, because they are flawed, because they demand a strict adherence to their dogma that nobody is going to be able to adhere to. Like it's just it's impossible to be perfect. But they show such compassion about it also, even at the end where you have the guy with the gambling debt, that was a cover up for the fact that what's her name had a kid, like Dooku says, they need to be sent to the Citadel, right? Like they've got to go to jail for this. And Yoda's like, no, that's not how we do things. Like it shows, I feel like Palpatine would say that their compassion is a flaw, and I don't think that I buy it as a flaw, but it shows why it is both necessary and problematic, and it makes it even more tragic for me, because I feel like all Anakin ever had to do was say, "I'm married,"
Yeah.
and Yoda would have said, "It's okay, we know."
We're
Like,
you're not good at secrets. We're
or
aware.
or like even if Yoda genuinely didn't know, I feel like Yoda would have said, we'll find a way to make it all right."
We'll figure it out. Yeah.
But
Um,
because nobody ever says anything, that's the thumbnail that we used before. I don't know if it's the same one we used today.
yeah,
Said,
like
said don't tell your master. Like, that's
don't tell
another
your master.
theme through the whole thing is, oh,
It's
we're
like
gonna do this, but don't tell your master about it.
it was
Like,
almost a drinking game at
right.
some point. It's like, oh, they said it.
But it's this thing where, like, nobody is expected to live completely up to those standards because the
Yeah.
compassion is going to be shown. And
Mhm.
sometimes I feel like that gets exploited. We were talking about that earlier too, about
Yeah.
how you can break the rules because you know that compassion is going to be there for you
Right.
in the end.
Or I even we were talking about this before the stream. The idea with the armbands and the rituals that
Sure, yeah.
Dooku learns to cleanse himself after. Oh man, we haven't even gotten to the Moss. We haven't gotten to Ventress. There's so much to talk about.
Are we going to have to
So
do a part 2 to this?
we might have to do a part 2 because oh my gosh, there's so much to talk about. But I wouldn't complain. But we have the armbands and the rituals that Dooku learns because he was overcome by the Moss. And then you go later when he has Qui-Gon as his Padawan, and he's hunting down the guy that made his brother's racer crash,
Right.
and he like is basically like for 216. Um, he is torturing the guy. You see Dooku use lightning at different points, and I kind of got this idea because you see that he's still using these bands, and he shows Qui-Gon like how to withstand pain, and Qui-Gon's like, "Teach me how to like take pain," which was both weird and very Qui-Gon at the same time. But I got this vibe that Dooku, like at first, the first time I listened to it, I've only listened twice. I'm not as big of a super fan as Sen, but the first time I listened, I thought maybe he just kept doing it because he was always afraid he was still corrupted after the Moss. And then my second listen, I kind of got the feeling more that it was kind of like he could use the dark side because he knew how to purify himself. So he, in his mind, was justifying the use of this darker stuff. Where I felt like Sifo and Lean were doing it more because they were their line of work. I don't know a better turn of phrase. Like their journey put them around dark side stuff so much that they needed a way to purify themselves. Where Dooku was choosing to go and like use the dark side, and then just kind of using this get out of the dark side free card and kind of abusing these rituals.
Right. I mean, but at the same time, I think you're right that what Lean and Sifo were doing was different than what Dooku was doing.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also being so secretive about what they're doing
Yes.
that it implies that they know that there's something wrong with it.
Yep.
Like, because if it was all on the up and up, then they wouldn't have to hide it. They would
Right.
say, "Oh, we're gathering these artifacts because we don't want other people to find them. Or we're gathering these
Right.
artifacts because they're dangerous and we want to stick them in our secret closet room behind the stained glass window."
Right.
That which is a bad idea. If you're gonna put a window, like windows, like the first thing you notice is, hey, there's light coming in that window,
Yeah.
but we're in the middle of a building. Like, how does, like, I know this is space, but what? Physics works different in this universe, but
I mean, it was a pretty ace window.
there you go.
It was a bad joke. I'm sorry.
Was it you that tweeted that Anakin would never get into the Bogan collection because
Because
he
I
hates
made a
sand?
meme. He hates sand. I made a meme about it. I tweeted it. It was great.
But like, even just the fact that they kept that in the same building, like I don't know if it's still canon, but it used to be canon that the Jedi Temple was built on top of an older Sith temple.
Yeah,
But
it is canon. Yep.
But like that whole thing too, like it's almost like it's baked into the fabric of who the Jedi Order are as they are presented, and it is both a strength and a flaw.
Yeah.
But we have like 5 minutes left.
I mean, we can go a little bit over. I can probably go till about 10 after, I think. We'll keep going if we want, because like we still have um we haven't talked about Ventress at all. We haven't talked about Sipho. We haven't talked about Prophecy.
Um, well, why don't pick one and we'll see where we go.
Okay, let's get to Ventress. I mean, she's like on the cover. You can't really see it, but it's over there.
Oh, your poster, yeah.
So let's get to Ventress, because it would be a shame to not really talk about her at all.
One of the things I really like about Ventress is one, there had to be kind of a narrative framing for this story, and I liked that Ventress was that. One, because I liked the character and it gave her another purpose in canon, because I feel like she kind of got shortchanged. But I like that she's kind of working out her own issues through learning about Dooku's life.
Yeah.
And it, we were talking earlier too about, like how every narrator we get in this story is unreliable.
Yes.
Because, Dooku is filtering what he sends to Jinza. Dooku is filtering which journal entries he allows Ventress to find.
Yep.
And everything is filtered through Ventress's lens of the Kai thing that's going on in her head. Whether or not that's another manipulation or not, like that Darkrai, that was the thing we were talking about before the stream. Is how open that is to interpret. But I like that Ventress was kind of the vehicle for us as an audience to get into this story, because she has her own motives, she has her own goals, and they are different, presumably, from our motives and our goals. But it really worked for me. What did you think about the use?
I really liked it as a structure. Just getting to see Ventress again, having certain of her elements of her backstory brought back in, was really cool. And like I said, or like you said, with the framing, is you get to learn about Ventress, but you also get to learn about Dooku, and you get to make Dooku appear as this kind of myth and legend. But you're doing that because you're watching it or listening to it from the perspective of somebody who idolizes him. And what was fun is because so much of this was through Ventress's own thoughts, getting to know her in a way that you couldn't know her on a TV show. There's one part. I know this is kind of connected to Yoda, but it's really not. I'm sure of it. But there's one point where she looks over, or she's talking to Kai, and she makes a reference about him pulling a Yoda, which is a reference to something that happened earlier in the story. And that line had a really interesting duality to it in terms of purpose, because on the one hand, it was kind of like a light moment, and it was showing Ventress's relationship and how she was talking to Ghost Kai. But it also serves to show you that Ventress is getting into the story. Like, she is invested in this story in the same way we're invested in this story, because she's making a joke about, like, from the source material that is the story.
Right.
It's almost like this inside joke between her and Kai. And I don't know. I pick lines like that really make me excited, whether I'm reading them, listening to them, watching them on a movie. Something that serves that kind of, it's telling you something about the character's state of being while pretending that it's about something else.
I mean, and on top of all that, I think we would be remiss if we didn't, mention the thing that a lot of people on Twitter got excited about, which I was excited about too, that it it made the arena on Rat Attack from the micro series, at least semi-canon,
bringing it back to some degree.
Because it was the micro series is the reason I liked Ventress all along. And I felt like, you and I had this conversation before too about, and this is a longer conversation than we have time for now, but I felt like in a lot of ways that the Clone Wars, the Filoni series, kind of misunderstood who I thought Ventress was. And I felt like this really does understand who she is. I feel like her character is really spot on.
Yeah. And it's funny that you say that, because I liked Ventress a lot in this, and I definitely connected to her, but I didn't like Ventress from the micro series, and I didn't like Ventress until the Clone Wars, which would go to your point where you thought she was presented incorrectly, and I'm like, I like how they changed her. but to then have those two different perspectives and then get something out of her character in this, I think shows that this is a very good transitory story for Ventress, and how she kind of it comes from this person who she was, was a Jedi, had very unconventional training, was very potentially not even ever authorized in her Jedi training, because we only have unreliable narrators, we don't really know.
Right.
And even to the extent where Ventress only knows what Kai told her, and we don't know if Kai was lying to her or not. And so to see that, and to see just the pain and the hurt that she goes through, and how she is repeatedly, every master she has in her entire life has let her down, hurt her, used her in some way. We technically don't know if Kai did, but she is certainly led to believe that Kai did by how Dooku talks to her at the end. Rather, whether or not that is true, it's irrelevant. Ventress thinks it's true.
Well, and it gets into the ambiguity about Kai too.
Mm-hmm.
Is that actually a Force ghost? Which I think we are meant to conclude that it was not. But what I'm still think is left ambiguous is Kai a kind of psychological coping mechanism in her own head, or is it Dooku projecting into her mind? Either way, it's not real, but it makes it unreliable because it's not actually Kai.
Right.
But it still works as, at least for narrative purposes.
And I feel like at the end we were also kind of led to believe a little more that it could have been Dooku manipulating it. But again, Dooku is also not the most reliable person. And if he is aware that this coping mechanism exists, even if he didn't create it, he could simply say that he did, or he could be manipulating a thing he didn't create. So it all comes down to, do you believe Dooku or not?
Right.
I think. But yeah, that aspect with her was really interesting. And I thought that was a great idea, because otherwise you just have Ventress thinking to herself, and you don't really get to know Ventress like that. But to have this person in her mind that she would be completely open with, this is not a person where she had any reservation, she was holding anything back, gets her talking. If this were a novel, you could write Ventress's thoughts, but you can't do that. And the story had people narrating things, but you don't have a narrator. Like, there's no out of universe narrator saying a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Our stream is offline.
It's dropping frames like crazy.
Yeah.
And do SIFO and.
Okay. It looks like we're starting to have some tech problems. So in light of
Dooku found out.
Dooku found us. He found us.
We tried to trick him by doing it early, but he found us anyway.
He found us anyway. So yeah, there's so much more that I want to talk about. So we will either do a Jedi Lost Part 2, or we might just lump like some of the prophecy stuff into a streamcast about prophecy.
Right.
But I think we'll take our good luck and leave it there.
Yeah. Thanks for coming out. We've had a fun chat, even though we did it at an earlier hour. So thanks for coming and hanging out with us. If you want, make sure you're following us on all the places, on our Twitter and our Instagram, and join our Discord, which will be linked. You can find us on Facebook, or join our forums. Lots of places out there to find us. But I think we're going to go ahead and call it here.
I will say really quick, the person in the chat who was here earlier, Fabio, he didn't drop any links, but if you search his name or the website, Tatooine